Hello, I am Kaplunk the Third. Yes, it's blackendrose here, and I'm back with Kerbal Space Program for my series of Kerbal Training Academy. Now then, let's get right down to it. Now, I did some thinking from, well, I've been playing a little bit of this in my own time, KTA Real, Kerbal Training Academy. I did a little bit of prep work after the previous episode to prepare for this next part. And the preparation that is going to this next part is this, which is a very simple orbital space station that I've just sort of dumped into orbit. Now, what you'll see on here, as you can see here, these are docking ports. Now, this is very important for this next phase, because you need to have docking ports on the station itself and the craft you're going to try and dock with it. The docking ports are also tailored to a specific size. So we have the junior, the regular, and the senior, which I haven't attached onto this. But basically, you can only dock a craft with junior docking ports onto other junior docking ports. Same goes for the regular ones. You can't have different sizes for them. They've both got to match the same size. But let's get back to the Space Center. Now then, this is where things get rather important. Let me just get started. Now, we'll start with the usual. Now, the important thing is we need to attach some specific components. So obviously we have the senior, the regular, and the junior, and the shielded docking port as well. Now, you can have your own design choices for this, but what I tend to do is stick a docking port on the tip there. That's just my sort of design idea thing. And then we continue with building the craft, so we'll do what I normally do, which is not that. We'll attach the heat shield on the bottom there. And where's the utilities? Here we go. Right, now we'll put two of these on here for re-entry purposes. And communications. I mean, communications isn't necessary for the sandbox mode, but I get so used to putting it on that I put it on anyway. And we'll put the standard decoupler on. Now, all this stuff I'm doing at the moment, a lot of this stuff is covered in the previous episodes about how I designed the craft. Rightio, so now we get on to the next phase, which is going to be a little bit different. Nah, actually, we'll see if we can do it with this. Right, okay, so we'll attach that. Now, actually, let me detach that and put another one on that. Now, what I need to do, it's just made me remember. No, not that, that's too big. That's too small. There we go. Now what this is, these are for RCS thrusters, and it just occurred to me that this is getting a little bit too big, so redesign that slightly. Now, what we need for this next part is in this section. I tend to use these, the RCS thruster blocks, and I put it on the symmetry mode for 4, and I put 1 set, 2 set. Now, there's a very special reason for that, and I will pull up the center of mass for this. What the RCS thrusters, what they do is they make it easier for you to adjust the trajectory of your craft and to perform very delicate maneuvers, because obviously the main engine pushes out a lot of thrust, but when you're trying to perform delicate maneuvers such as docking, you can't really rely on the main engine. Plus, With the RCS thrusters balanced as they are, I can move in all lateral directions as well as turning, as well, and I can go backwards as well. The reason I have put 2 sets is to do like a sort of a pivoting motion, so that I can apply thrust from above and below the centre of mass. That means that I can turn much more stable and apply motion in a much more stable way. That's generally the way I go, and I put the RCS monopropellant tank on there just to provide enough monopropellant. Right, let's get the rest of the craft done. So we need to put a coupling or decoupler on here. Now I'm going to start using some larger craft design ideas. So where is it? It's structural. No, not that one. There it is. We'll start using some larger rocket design ideas. As you can see, the centre of mass is going down, or further down, and let's attach a rather large, chunky engine onto this. And coupling, we'll attach this, and we'll attach the big ass kickback engines. Right, we want to put some aerodynamics on this. I'm not utilising everything, but I'm utilising like generally the basics. So once again, we will do what I normally do, which is throw that on there, and throw attachments on there. Right, aerodynamics. Right, same as usual. Wings at the top, or winglets at the top and winglets at the bottom. Make sure they're balanced right. I don't think they are. Let's pull that out. No, they're not quite balanced right. There we go. Right, now what I do need to do is attach some solar panels onto this. We'll use the rather large ones. There we go. Right, I think that's all we need. We're not putting science modules on this because we don't really need them. Right, I'll get into the science side of things as the series develops, if it develops. Right, let's get some crew into this. And currently, we only have Bill Kerman, which is an annoyance, because that means I need to attach something else onto this. Because what I need to attach now, because I don't have a pilot, is I need to attach, where is it? Not that. Nor that, that's the big one. I need to attach this. Now this allows me to use the SAS without a pilot. Right, and Bill Kerman is an engineer, so I can't use SAS with him. Okay, so the basic design is up and running. Everything is set. All these modules are set. I don't think I've forgotten anything. Let's just have a quick go over. Okay, I think I've got everything I need on here. I haven't attached lights, but I don't tend to use them. Right, okay, so let's launch this bad boy. Okay, so the SAS is on. I will throttle up and fire. Alright, so standard operating procedures at this point. Just turn us up a bit. Now, it may seem like that these kickback boosters aren't generating a lot of thrust and they're a bit slow to go. That is true. They burn for longer, but it takes them more time to get things up to speed. But you'll notice the enormous benefit this has on much larger craft. So at the moment we just let it keep rolling on up. Hopefully this will work. I still have a little bit of a trouble with docking, but what we're covering here, which I didn't actually say at the start, that was a bit stupid of me. We're going to cover rendezvous manoeuvres in space and docking manoeuvres, if that wasn't plainly obvious at this point. Okay, so as you can see, we are reaching quite high into the atmosphere now. And, yep, there they go. So I need to get up. Well, first we need to detach. And now we'll just coast a little bit. Alright, so adjust our trajectory. Right, so the first thing we want to do is we'll set that as the target. That's the space station itself. And you do that just by selecting the craft in orbit and set target. Okay, so we now need to establish an orbit. So let's get to work on that. Now the main sail engine is unbelievably powerful. So what we need to do is get our orbit into position. The first task you want to do for any sort of orbital maneuvers like this, or to establish yourself docking with another craft, is first to establish an orbit. Right, you'll notice some of these other points coming up, but we'll deal with those in a little bit. First things first, we need to establish a stable orbit position. Now what I tend to do is just get my orbit to be just above the orbit of the thing that I'm trying to dock with. Or at least have the apoapsis above said thing. Oh, the weight difference is a little bit off. Right, so... Okay, so we're now in a stable orbit position. Right, I'll just pause this. Now, this is where it gets very important. You will notice some new markers have appeared on the map. In fact, let's just go to resume flight. I mean, we're in a stable orbit position at the moment, so we're not going to come down. So first, we have the green line, which is the orbital position of the space station itself. So that's the orbit it will take, going in circular motion. Now we have, over here, we can see the periapsis and the apoapsis of the space station itself. So if we were to match our orbits, we'd have to get the apoapsis of our craft to match that, and vice versa for the periapsis. But for the moment we don't need that. Over here we have the ascending node and the descending node. That basically depicts the point where our orbit and the space station's orbit match. The problem is that at the moment we're slightly off kilter. As you can tell if I zoom in a little bit. Our orbital position does not match the planes, or the like the horizontal setup. We're not matching properly. So that's a problem we have to deal with. We need to correct, and the best way to correct that is either at the ascending or descending node specifically, so that we can correct the planes at the central point. Now, as we can see here, we have target position and intersect. This means that when we reach there, the space station is there. Now, what we want is for our craft and the space station to intersect at the same point, as close together as possible. We have another intersect point there. Now, we're going to delve into using the maneuver planner at this point. Now, first things first, we need to adjust so that our orbit is on the same level kilter as the other craft's orbit. Now, to do this, we use these options here, the triangles. Right, so as you can see, they're now starting to flip positions. That means that that the orbit is balancing out. You want to get that basically at 0 to try and balance it out properly. So now that that is set, all we need to do is wait, and you'll see some new information has appeared. This information here indicates how much delta V is required to complete the maneuver, and further down below indicates the estimated burn time and the time it takes for us to reach the node itself. What we'll do is we'll use this just to adjust it to the maneuver point. Now, because we still have a rather powerful engine on here, we don't have to actually apply much thrust. I'm just going to quick save. Now, since the estimated burn is so small, we don't need to factor in too much about the node burn time, but that will become important later. So, oops, I missed that. Right, what you want to do is get it as close to 0 as possible, but try not to overshoot it. Alright, so now our planes are balanced. Now here comes the next bit, which is very important. At the moment, our orbits are very much unbalanced. So what we need to do is set up a scenario where our craft will intersect with the opposing craft. Now the way to do this, or the way I do it, is to establish another maneuver point at the next intersect. And then we extend our orbit out. Oh, hang on, this is in the way. Now what this does, as you can see here, we have the second intersection point. And that is now very close together. In fact, the separation there is literally 0, which I've never got it that close before. So just quick save again. Now what I've done is I've made our orbit much larger, so as we move outwards into a much wider orbit, we start to slow down while the space station is going faster than us in its orbit. So what this means is, I mean, you can do it the other way round as well. You can bring your orbit in tighter, so you go faster to bring yourselves in a closer position. But we're too close to the planet anyway, so that's not really going to work. But as you saw, I used the maneuvers here. These two green ones are for growing the apoapsis or pulling back the apoapsis. The blue ones are for adjusting the position of your orbit, so moving it, if for all intents and purposes, just you maintain the same sort of circle. You don't grow it or shrink it, but you move its effective position. It's not one I often use because it gets a bit complicated. I generally just try and balance the planes so that they are on the same planes, and then extend or pull back the orbit. Those are the only ones I ever tend to use. So we have now established what we're going to do. I'm just going to extend that just for fun. Right, so as you can see here, the estimated burn is 5 seconds on this engine. Now what you want to try and do is start your burn so that, how can I basically divide the estimated burn time in half, and then start your burn at that point before the node. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So basically, I've got to do a burn of 5 seconds. So I need to do a full thrust at 5 seconds, or for 5 seconds. So what I'm going to do is start at about 2 seconds, because then I will have spent 2 seconds before the burn applying thrust, and about 2 to 3 seconds after the node applying thrust. It's the most accurate way of doing it. If you try and burn at 0, you'll actually be playing a bit of catch up. So what you want to do is try and equalise it out a little bit. Right, so we're getting closer. I tend to quick save a lot, especially when I'm doing rendezvous manoeuvres, because it's very easy to get wrong. You need to be very delicate. Using the mainsail engine is not a good idea for this. I really should detach for this part. And fire now. Right, okay, so there we go. It's about as close as I'm going to get it. Right, so this is not going to be exact because I've been using a mainsail engine. They don't burn quite precisely. But what I want to do at this point, just pull that back a little bit. Now I want to pull the orbit back in. Oops, there's it. God damn it, pressing the wrong buttons. Right, now, as you can see, trying to pull the orbit in gets a bit tricky. So this is where we use the blue icons to just pull our orbit around a bit. And then we pull it in a bit further. The aim is to get the dotted line as close to the burn this point as possible. You may have to move the maneuver around a little bit just to try and balance it out. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want to try and get as close as possible. Right, so let's pull it in just a smidgen. Yeah, it gets very finicky at this point. Basically, try not to worry too much about getting this exactly right. Because the plan is just to get yourself close enough so you can see the object in question, and balance out your orbit so that you are relatively going at the same orbital speed as the target, because then you'll be going at a relative speed of basically nothing from each other. You'll see what I mean when we get to it. So we've got to wait for 40 minutes. So let's speed up this process a little bit. Now you want to be careful when you warp if you warp too much, because it can be easy to miss your burns. And this is very delicate manoeuvring. To be fair, this took me ages to work out how to do. Right, okay, you can see it now. The space station we can now see. And as you can tell, we are facing away from it. This has now changed to target. I'll just pause it. It's changed to target. That means what our speed relative to the target is. So, at the moment, we are moving closer towards it at a speed of 228.9 meters a second. Now that's going to fly all over the place a little bit. Alright, let's just quick save again. Now we just continue to wait until we reach our burn point. Right, okay, so we're getting much closer to it now. But try not to panic. It's all under control. 3, 2, right, burn. Right, so I'm going to turn it off now. Now, this is where things get quite important. The prograde and retrograde burns are now in relation to the target. So if I want to slow myself down from approaching the target any further, I go to prograde and burn, and then I will slow my speed down relative to the target. Now this is something that I do want to do. So we'll slow down. Right, okay. Now things are going to start getting a little bit tricky. So we will detach ourselves. And now we're going to spin ourselves around. Because we want to face the target. Right, now here comes the tricky bit. We just use a small amount of thrust to push us closer towards the target. Hopefully avoiding what remains of this part. Right. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky, and for this I'm going to actually we'll just push ourselves a bit further forwards. What you want to do is to get the prograde to be centered over the target, which is this pinky purpley icon. Because at the moment we're moving slightly to the left of the target. Now this is where the RCS thrusters come in, so I'll press R to turn that on, and I'm going to shut down the engine. And now, by selecting this, we go into docking mode, which means I won't be facing a different direction. So now I can use the RCS thrusters to adjust myself. Using RCS thrusters, you use the same buttons as you would for turning your craft. So the WASD keys, you can press shift to accelerate, or you can hold control to decelerate. So we want to try and keep ourselves on target, and we just sort of wait a little bit now, making small corrections as we go. I'll just quick save again. Now at the moment we're on course to approach the target. Oh, we're drifting off slightly. Because our orbital positions weren't matched properly, your craft can drift off a little bit. So you just need to keep making little corrections as you go to make sure that you're still on target. So as you can see, we are approaching the space station at a reasonable speed. Oh, turned up a little bit. Right, so this is where we need to be a little bit more careful, because we don't want to crash into the thing. I can't stress that enough. So we are on approach. Now what I tend to do at this point, and it will vary for other people, is I start to slow down progressively as we get closer. Now it's not particularly necessary, it just depends on how you handle yourself, how confident you are. Now I've done this numerous times, and I still get a little bit angsty about doing it, as you can tell by the fact that I'm constantly quick saving. Rightio, so we are on a relatively stable approach. Now at the moment, the target itself is actually the command module of the craft itself, which is all well and good, but you can't dock onto the command module unless it has a docking port attached, which kind of gives us a little bit of a problem. So let's slow ourselves down. Now because we're a small craft, it's easy for us to slow down, but for something with greater mass, it will require more effort to slow down. And trying to do this on the main engine alone is nigh on impossible, because you'd have to keep turning yourself around to keep adjusting your position. So unless you've got RCS thrusters on, you're basically not going to be docking. Now, I'll pause it now. Now what we want to do is we want to change our target to be a docking port. Now since we've got a docking port junior, we need to attach ourselves to another docking port junior. So what we will do is we'll slow ourselves down to a crawl, and I can tell, yeah, so what you can do is you can select the craft itself and set target to specific ports. So we'll set target to that, and because I've got myself set to the target area, it will adjust itself correctly. So because I have my docking port on the top of the command module, I don't have to do this. But if you've got it attached anywhere else on the craft, you need to do control from here, because then the RCS thrusters will balance themselves to try and maneuver itself based on where it's controlling from. So if I had it on this side here, it would apply the thrusters in such a way that if I was to try and push myself forwards, it would push myself forwards in the direction of the docking port, not in the direction of the command module. If I press caps lock, you'll notice that all these dials are turned blue. That means that the amount of thrust generated by the RCS thrusters is much more gentle, which is a lot easier for performing very delicate manoeuvres. So now all we need to do is just approach this thing gradually. Now you don't want to go too fast when approaching for docking, because you might have to make very quick manoeuvres, and obviously you don't want to like crash into it and blow up. Now what you really want to do is try and get yourself as level as possible. I always have a bit of difficulty with this. Even now I'm not coming at it straight on, but that's okay. You can get around that. The docking port will correct itself. Now what happened there, when you get close enough to a docking port that will match yours, it kind of magnetizes to it. What I tend to do at that point is I turn off the SAS, because what I find is the SAS tends to conflict with the actual docking magnetism, and they try and correct each other. So I just sort of let the craft just be pulled in, and the docking port does the rest, assuming you're coming at it at a fairly straight angle. You may sort of bob around a little bit and like balance all around it trying to dock, but it tends to do itself as long as you're not coming at it from too difficult an angle. And so we have now docked, and if we wanted to, we could, if I hold Alt, right click, I could transfer fuel if I wanted to. Now since I've barely used any fuel, there isn't much point in doing that. I can transfer all kinds of things, even crew if I wanted to. So let's take dear old Bill and transfer him into there. So now he's on the space station itself, but we need to transfer someone back to actually use this craft. So let's transfer the pilot back into it. How much power has this thing got? It is burning through power like nothing. Oh, stop research. That's why. Right, let's get this thing to actually see the sun. Right, so now we're getting some energy back. And we have now successfully docked with this space station. Now, this is a science module. If you was to run science experiments and transfer them into this, it becomes data. That data is then processed into science with scientists on board, which you can then transmit back as actual science points back to Kerbin. Now this can actually be science experiments you've already acquired science points for, so it's a good way of farming science points. Let me just turn off the RCS stuff and the docking stuff. Now that we've successfully docked, we've transferred the crew over, so let's get back. So we want to control from the command module, and we want to undock. So I'll turn on the RCS, and what I'm going to do is use control just to push me away, because otherwise the docking port will eventually try and pull me back in. So we use the RCS and the control keys and the docking mode to push ourselves away, and we are a very good distance away now. So if we want to return to Kerbin, we just need to do the standard re-entry stuff now. So we are facing retrograde. Oh yeah, I need to turn the engines on first. You can actually perform orbital maneuvers with just RCS thrusters. It will just take a lot longer to do, and it will burn through monopropellant. But that can be quite handy, especially when you start getting to the moon, where the gravity is much weaker. Anyway, let's get Valentina back through standard methods. Right, there we go. Now, as you can see, space station is flying off into the distance now, as our orbital positions have now changed. And we'll just retract that. I mean, basically at this point, it's just reviewing what we've already gone over as far as re-entry goes. So we just have to wait for us to be caught, which is now. I mean, the fact that all of these things are happening automatically, such as the retrograde, the targeting, and all that, is because I've got this SAS module on there, the Advanced Inline Stabilizer. If I didn't have that, I would have to maneuver myself to find these things. But that's just the same as any sort of maneuver. You can turn on the stability assist, turn yourself around, find the things you need, bish bash bosh. But since I have access to them, I'm going to utilise them. Right, so now we just need to wait for us to start coming down. Turn it up a little bit. Now the purpose of being able to dock in orbit is very handy, because as you saw, I can transfer fuel and other resources and crew between from orbit and, well, from other craft. One thing to do is if you have a great big fuel tank in orbit and then bring up a couple of craft to put fuel into it, then what you can do is get a craft into space, and using some of the fuel to get into space, then you can refuel it in space so that you can perform more complex maneuvers with more fuel. Because obviously, as you've seen, most of the craft that you are putting together is actually being lost, and a lot of the fuel is being lost just getting it into Kerbin orbit. So what you need to do, what you can do, is if you was to get more fuel into orbit and have it as a fuel dump, then you can get craft up to it, refuel them, so you still have your great big engines and great big fuel tanks, and then you can use all that fuel with the great big powerful thrust engines without having to deal with the atmosphere and the gravity and the air resistance and and all of that from Kerbin, such as getting to the moon, to Minmus, to Juno, to other places. I've only ever got to Juno once, and that was by accident. But with these basic concepts, especially with docking as well, you're now capable of building multi-stage craft that can dock with other craft. So if you were to establish, say, a staging ground around the moon, you could then have a very simple craft that can go down from the space station, or from the moon staging ground to the moon's surface, and then back up, without necessarily having to have all the parts, the fuel, to go from the moon to Kerbin. And then you can start getting little, effectively trade routes going on with craft that stay in space permanently, and they never go back to Kerbin, whereas other craft that exclusively go from Kerbin to a space station and back again for transferring of resources, science, and all other kinds of things. So the possibilities do get rather exciting, especially when you start looking at the mods you can put into this. Let's speed ourselves up, because we want to... Yeah, Valentina went up with the space station when the space station went to orbit. Now the space station is never going to come back down. Its purpose is to stay into orbit and to run science experiments. But Valentina is no longer needed up there. She's needed for other missions. So let's get her back so that she can perform other missions. Right, so yeah, we are coming down. And look how much fuel we still have left. We have a absolute butt ton of fuel to work with. And we are coming down in Kerbin's atmosphere. We still have a lot of resources such as monopropellant and fuel. I woefully overspec the craft. Right, there is a lot of fuel, monopropellant and whatnot still on this craft that didn't need to be on here. But generally it's better to overspec the craft just a little bit than to underspec it, because there's nothing worse than getting trapped in orbit, because then you have to send up another craft to go up and retrieve them. And there are missions that are like that, where you just send a craft into orbit to retrieve a pilot or a kerbin effectively, and then get them back. With what I've shown you here at Rendezvous, you can actually perform those missions quite easily. I mean, you can actually use something called the grabber, and what that does is that will attach itself to just about anything, including other craft. So you can pull debris and other craft back down from orbital positions. That's mostly used for the asteroid redirection, if you choose to do that. I've only managed to attach to an asteroid once, but I absolutely cocked up the design, so I couldn't actually move the asteroid at all. And it gets very complicated. It uses the same basic rendezvous mechanics, but it is really quite delicate and really fiddly. I mean, using these rendezvous mechanics, you can get to any planet or moon in the solar system in this fictional setup. I mean, again, get into Juna, Juna's the only one that springs to mind, but the difference with trying to get to those places is the time frame required. You'll have windows of opportunity where you can reach places like Juna, Kerbal, I think Kerbal's one of them, and things like that. You have windows of opportunity where you can reach them in effective times. Otherwise, you can just perform the same maneuvers that I've been performing, but it will just take years rather than, like, hours. Or years by the mission clocks. Right. Let's detach. Oh, yeah, whoops. Detach. Right, so we're now coming down on the heat shield. So everything's going well. The heat shield can take it quite easily. And we just let the re-entry do its thing. Alright, we're coming in rather nicely. Right. And the chutes go up. And we come down. There we go. Right, well, we're coming down in a quite stable way, so may as well just let this run its course now. So here we have explored the basics of delicate orbital maneuvers, rendezvous mechanics, the maneuver system, and the basics of docking. You can use docking to actually start constructing rather elaborate craft in space, just by docking the various parts together. At that point, the possibilities literally become endless. You can generally, if you want to build a rather large space station, you have to send them up in pieces and dock them together in those pieces, because trying to get a whole space station up in one go requires a lot of logistics, because space station parts are very heavy. So let's just recover this. And Valentina Kerman has now returned back to Kerbin, ready for the next mission. And there we have it. I think next time I will go over some basics of space plane design, mostly because I've been playing it a bit in my own time and actually worked out a very basic space plane design from the earliest parts. And also I can go over the various mechanics that go into that. And then we'll probably look into what is required to get in from Kerbin to the moon. But we'll get into that at a later point. For now, thank you guys so much for watching me. I'm Plunk the Third, also known as blackendrose 123. This has been Kerbal Training Academy, and I will see you at the next training video. Take care, my friends.